Now, number 9, it says a fish tank is being drained at a constant rate. The graph shows a linear relationship. So that means it's going to make a line, because it has the word linear, between the volume of the water in the fish tank in liters and the time in minutes the tank has been draining. Which value best represents the rate of change of the volume of water in the fish tank with respect to time? Now, anytime you hear that word, rate of change, I want you to immediately think, and I'm going to write this down, rate of change. I want you to remember that just means slope. And slope is just the m in the equation y is equal to mx plus b. So if you keep that in mind, this one right here would be really easy. We're just trying to find the slope of this line in the graph, and remember m represents that slope. So we're going to go ahead and we are going to write an equation here. We're going to write some value for m once we figure it out. And then we'll have x, and we'll have either plus or minus a b value representing the y-intercept. Because remember, b represents the y-intercept. Now there's more than one way you can do this. First of all, you can actually come over here and try to find 2 good points on this line, and you can try to find the slope from that. Or using the slope formula, or you can use spreadsheet. Now my favorite way is just to use spreadsheet, so that's what I'm going to do. Now I do need 2 points on this graph, and so I want to go ahead and I want to determine which points I'm going to go ahead and use. So let's see, if I come over here, it looks like to me this point is at 0 and 60. So remember, whenever we're writing an ordered pair, I'm just going to draw a small graph over here just so you can remember. That's my x-axis, this is my y-axis, and whenever you have a line that goes through there somewhere, I want you to remember that when you write the ordered pair, you put the location of the x first, and then you put the location of the y value second. That's how we write an ordered pair. So I need 2 ordered pairs in order to use spreadsheet. So I'm going to write 2 different ordered pairs here, one right underneath the other, an x value and a y value. Now my x value is for the x-axis, right? So this is the x-axis right here on the bottom. So I'm going to go over, and notice this line, it hits 60 but on the y-axis, but on the x-axis it lines up with 0. So I'm going to put 0 for the x value, and then if I go all the way up, it hits 60 for the y value. So I'm using 0 and 60 as one of my points. The second point, I'm going to follow it over until it touches the x-axis, and notice it touches right here at 10. So I'm going to go ahead and write a 10 for my x value. And notice at this point, if I go back over to the left for the y, right, because this was 10, that's 20. If I go back down, this is also 0 for the y. So not only is this 0 for the x, this is 0 for the y. So just to give you an idea of what's happening here, if this was my graph right here, what they're doing is they're just showing you this one quadrant right here. So this is just quadrant 1. So instead of them showing you a graph that has 4 quadrants, they just took this one little corner out, and that's why that point over there is 0, 0. And so I'm going to say this is going to be 10 for the x value and 0 for the y value. So this is probably the hardest part of the whole problem, is making sure that you get the correct x values and the correct y values. And now once again, you could use the slope formula, right, which is given on your formula chart, but I'm just going to use the spreadsheet and put these 2 ordered pairs in it, and then use menu 461 to get the answer. So let me go ahead and pull this up. So I'm going to go ahead and go home. I'm going to go down the spreadsheet right here in the middle, hit enter. I do want to go up to the top, and I want to close or delete, I should say delete the spreadsheet because I have too many open. Go back in. Now it says 1.1, so I know I'm ready to use it. I'm going to change A to X and B to Y. And now I'm going to put in my ordered pairs. So I have 0 and 60. And then I have 10 and 0. Okay, now that I got my two ordered pairs, I'm going to click Home and go over to Data, and then I'm going to go down to the bottom and change this horizontal axis to X. Go to the one on the left, my vertical axis, and change it to Y. And then I'm going to hit Menu, 4 for Analyze, 6 for Regression, and 1 for Show Linear mx plus b. Because the m is going to be the slope. And there's my equation. I am going to move it because it sits on that line. It makes it a little bit hard to see. So let me go ahead and move it up here real quick. Click OK. And notice it's y equals negative 6x plus 60. So I'm going to write that down real quick. So y equals negative 6x plus 60. So there's my equation, and my m value is negative 6. So I should be finding a rate of change, right, or a slope of negative 6. So if I go down to my answers, it looks like A is the correct answer. It says negative 6 liters per minute. So go ahead and tell me how you got your answer. Also on here, I just want to remind you, if you had forgotten, for something that's linear, I'm going to write linear right here. If you're finding slope, you want to use menu 4, 6, 1. So you're going to use spreadsheet and then menu 4, 6, 1. So explain how you solved this problem correctly. Maybe you did it different than me. Or if you got it wrong, go ahead and explain how you saw me do it correctly. And then move on to the next problem and see if you can get it right. On number 10, notice that we were given an inequality, and it says, what is the solution set for 12 minus 4w is greater than 2 times w minus 18? So there's two ways we can do this. We can do this by hand, or we can use numerical solve and see if we can at least eliminate some answers. So numerical solve, most of the time, if it doesn't get you the answer, you can at least eliminate it. So we're going to start with insolve to eliminate some answers, and then we'll go ahead and work it out by hand to see which one is correct. So for insolve, we're going to use menu 3, 1. And I'm going to write my answer when I get it. So let me get my calculator real quick. Alright, so I'm going to go to calculate, and I'm going to do menu 3 and then 1. I got insolve here, and I'm going to type this in. Now I'm going to put an x instead of a w. You could put a w, but I just like putting an x for my variable. So I'm going to do 12 minus 4x instead of 4w. And then I'm going to set it equal to. Notice I did not use an inequality symbol. I used an equal sign. Because if you put an inequality symbol, it's going to tell you an error. Because you can't use that function in a calculator during the test. So then I have 2 times x minus 18, close parenthesis, comma, x. And notice it gives me 8. So since it tells me 8, it cannot be b and it cannot be d. So now what I got to do is I got to figure out which way is my sign supposed to be flipped. Because that's really what my problem is now, right? I have one sign flipped as greater than and one is flipped as less than. So to figure that out, I am going to have to do some work by hand to determine which way to flip it. So let's go ahead and do that. So I know that I'm going to put right here, I know the answer is going to be 8, but I need to figure out my symbol. So I'm going to rewrite this. I have 12 minus 4w is greater than 2 times w minus 18. Now if I start to work this out, the first thing I want to do is distribute this 2. So that's 2 times w, and that's going to give me 2w. And then I multiply this 2 times negative 18. Now I don't know what that is, but I can use my calculator to find out. 2 times negative 18, and that gives me negative 36. I'm going to go ahead and bring down my symbol, and I'm going to change the variable to black, just so I can keep the constant and the variable written as different colors. I'm going to bring down my 12, and I'm going to bring down my negative 4w. So our goal is, when we're doing a problem like this, I want you to remember is that your goal is to get the variables on the left and a constant on the right. So variable on the left, I'm going to write variable over here. and your constant on the right. Constant. So what I'm going to do, in order to get my variable to the left, I'm going to move this 2w over to the left. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract 2w. Now I know that negative 4 minus 2 more should give me negative 6, but I'm going to confirm it with my calculator. Negative 4 minus 2 gives me negative 6. So this is negative 6w. And if I want to move the constant value of 12 to the right, I got to do the inverse operation, or opposite. So I'm going to subtract 12 from both sides. These cancel. And on the right side, I'm going to do negative 36 minus 12 more. So negative 36 minus 12 more. And that's going to give me negative 48. And now we're in my final step. Now at this point, in all honesty, I already know which way my sign's going to flip. Because notice I'm dividing by a negative number. See how I have this negative coefficient of 6 with the w? Anytime you're dividing out a negative number in the final step, you have to flip the sign. So I'm going to divide by negative 6. So I'm just going to circle it. I'm dividing by the coefficient of w, which is negative 6. That means that I have to flip my sign because I'm dividing by a negative. So this greater than is actually going to become less than. I also need to divide this side by negative 6. And I'll end up with w is less than positive 8. So now I know for a fact that I had to flip that sign because I divided out a negative coefficient from my variable. And so I can come over here and I can pick C as the correct answer. So go ahead, pause the video, write your reflection of how you solved it correctly or how I solved it correctly if you got it wrong, and then go on to the next problem and see if you can get it correct before watching me solve it. So for problem number 11, notice it says, what are the factors of 2x squared plus x minus 15? And then it says select 2 correct answers. Now a couple things to remember. Remember that a factor, you can always find the factors by working backwards. If you were to use the quadratic formula or you were to find the zeros of it, you can actually work backwards and find your factors that way. Or you can go ahead and find the factors by factoring. Now this one right here, it's not too difficult to factor. And we're going to do that. I'm going to do it by hand. That's really the way that this is intended for you to do it, is to do it by hand. But if that doesn't work for you, I'll show you the trick at the end. So let's go ahead and take a look. First of all, we have 2x squared plus x minus 15. Now, when we want to factor, I want you to remember that you always want to go ahead and start out by making a number tree, because we're gonna use that number tree to figure out our factors for two numbers that will multiply to give us c, and that will add together, or combine I should say, to give us b. And when I say, just to refresh your memory, this number represents a x squared. This second one is actually our b value, and the last number is going to be our c value, our constant. So just remember, this is a, the coefficient of this x, which is 1 right now, is our b value, and then the last number, our constant, is c. Now because this one has a coefficient that's greater than 1 on the leading term, notice this leading term has a 2, we're going to have to use our trick that I showed you where we multiply that leading coefficient to c. So I'm actually going to say 2 times negative 15. In other words, this is going to be 2 times negative 15. Now if you don't know what that is, right, we just put it in a calculator. It'll do all the work. So I'm going to do calculate real quick. Let me go to calculate. Alright, I'm going to do 2 times negative 15, and that gives me negative 30. So I'm going to go ahead and write that down. This became negative 30. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to ignore this 2 because we just used it to multiply it to c, right? We said a times c. So I'm going to bring down the x. I'm going to bring down the x squared. And now that I got this brought down, I'm going to go ahead and find my factors for negative 30, now that my leading term has a coefficient of 1. So our goal is to find what numbers will multiply to give us 30. And then we'll add or combine together to give us 1. Because, right, my coefficient for this right here is 1. So let me go ahead and write my factors of 30. Now, if you're not good at writing your factors, you don't have to memorize your times tables. I don't memorize a lot of them. But what you can do is you can go ahead and take that 30. And you can say, okay, so 30, you can just start with 1 divided by 1, right? And it's going to tell you that it's going to be 1 and 30. So I'm going to go and write those two numbers. So we have 1 and 30. Now I just know from looking at this, I can't get a 1 from a 1 and a 30. So it's not going to work. So we're just going to keep going. So I'm going to try 2 now. 30 divided by 2. Okay, it gives me 2 and 15. Now 2 and 15, either is going to, if I add 2 to 15, it gives me 17. If I subtract 2 from 15, it gives me 13. So it still doesn't give me that coefficient of 1. So I'm going to try the next one. So I'm going to say 30 divided by 3. Okay, so that's going to give me 3 and 10. Notice our numbers are narrowing down. We're getting closer and closer to running out of numbers. 3 plus 10 is 13. 3 minus 10 is 7. So it's not that one. So I'll do 30 divided by 4. And that didn't work. So then I'll try 30 divided by 5. And I get 6. 5 and 6. Now here's the neat thing about using the factor tree that I like. Is once on the left side, you always put your lower number on the left side. And once you get to on the left, you get to a number like 5, for instance, and you see that the next number after 5 happens to be on the right, you know that you're done. Right? So I'm going to put done right here. Don't go any further because there's no other number in between 5 and 6 to try to divide into 30. This is all of its factors right here. So now, looking at this one, I say, you know what, I could get a 1 out of a 5 and a 6, right? Because if I do 6 minus 5, that's going to give me 1. So now that I know that, and I know I need to have a positive 1, that means that my 5 has to be negative, and my 6 has to be a positive number. Because 6 minus 5 is going to give me 1. And then if I multiply 6 times negative 5, it's going to give me negative 30. And you can always check it in your calculator, right? So 6 times negative 5 gives me negative 30. And if I do negative 5 plus 6, so negative 5 plus 6, it's going to give me a positive 1, which is that center term, my b value. So I'm going to go ahead and write these two factors. So I have x minus 5, that's using this first one, x minus 5. And then I have x plus 6, and that's using the second one. So now that I'm here, I got my two factors. We just have one step left. So notice we did multiply this a times the c. Now we got to bring this a back in as a fraction. So I'm going to bring it in. I'm going to write that 2. I'm going to divide this 5 by that 2. And I'll put it in black. We're dividing by 2. We're also going to divide this side by 2. And if this can be simplified, we must simplify it. So I got negative 5 divided by 2. So I'm going to put negative 5 divided by 2. And notice it stays the same. It cannot be simplified. Since it cannot, I got to take this 2 and move it in front of the x. So this one gets rewritten as 2x minus 5. And then for this one, I want to see, can 2 go into 6? So put my fraction bar, 6 over 2, and it gives me 3. So then this one right here becomes x plus 3, because 2 went into there evenly. And these are my two factors right here. So I'm going to go ahead and pick those answers. So notice we have 2x minus 5. That's going to be this one right here. And then we have x plus 3. That's going to be that one up there. So notice why there was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There was 6 different answers. Only 2 of them were correct. So this, I think right here, for this particular problem, this is, I think, the best way in order to solve it. Another way that you could have tried, is you could also go and you can look at your factors by simply looking at your zeros and working backwards. Let me show you what that would look like if you try to use your zeros to find the answer. So if I went over here, I'm going to go to calculate, or back to where the calculate screen, and then I'm going to go down to graph at the bottom. So let me go to graph, hit enter, and then I'm going to type in this equation here. We're going to graph it. So 2x squared plus x minus 15. Hit enter. Notice you can see the two zeros right here. And so what I can do is I can hit menu, go down to analyze graph, and go to 0. Move it across. So notice this one says that I have negative 3 and 0. So anytime you have negative 3, right, that's your x value. I want you to remember the way they got that is if we were writing this as a 0, we would say x is equal to negative 3. But if we wanted to undo this, we would just add 3 to both sides. Or you could look at it as make the 3 positive, and what we end up with is x plus 3. And that's one of our factors. So notice, right, for the one like this is really easy. We could just take that 0 and just change the sign from a negative to a positive, and we knew that x plus 3 had to be one of our factors. Now the more complicated one is going to be the one on the right, because we don't get an exact number. But let's take a look at what that looks like. So I'll do menu again, analyze, 0. I'll move it over here to the left of this 0, click it, drag it over to the right, and click it, and notice we end up with 2.5, comma 0. And this is the one that's going to look a little bit more difficult, but I got x is equal to 2.5. And so on this one right here, if you were trying to work backwards, it would be difficult because you don't have the fraction. So you would have to convert 2.5 into a fraction. So I think that's why this trick, it doesn't work as well on this problem. But if I wanted to put 2.5 in a calculator and approximate to a fraction, so that's option 2, it would tell me that it's 5 over 2. Now that would make more sense if I'm trying to convert it. X is equal to 5 over 2. Because what I could do is, I could say, well, you know what? Before I go ahead and change the sign and subtract the 5, I first need to get rid of this division. So the way they get rid of division is I multiply by the denominator, and I do that on both sides. So basically this becomes 2x over here is equal to, and we're still left with the 5 because those 2's cancels. And then after they cancel each other out, I can then say, well, I need to move the 5 over now, so I'm going to subtract the 5. Those cancel, and I'll end up with my final answer of 2x minus 5. So this is one way you can do it, working backwards from finding your zeros using a calculator. You still get the same answer. What I would recommend is you do what you think is the easiest method. If the easiest method is to factor it, then factor it. If the easiest method is to go ahead and find it this way by working backwards, you can do so. And a third way, which I'm not going to show it right now, is to use the quadratic formula. And you have that formula on your formula chart. So you have 3 different ways you could solve this. I like factoring. I think it's easier. Pick your best method, and then what I want you to do at this point is, once again, write a story of how you solved it. Did you use the quadratic formula? Did you work backwards from your zeros? Or did you go ahead and factor it? So explain how you solved it and got the correct answer, or how you watched me get the correct answer, and then move on to your next problem. Problem number 12, notice it says a part of a quadratic function f is graphed on the grid. What is the domain of the part of the function shown? So just remember that when we talk about domain, we're talking about our x values. So I need you to remember that on number 12, domain is equal to x values. In other words, it wants to know how far does your graph go to the left and how far does it go to the right. It doesn't care about up and down, just left and to right. So let's go ahead and take a look here. So I'm going to go ahead and if I wanted to, you could put graph and paper over here. I like how they have this option here. So I'm going to add a point. So I have a point right here. Let me get this lined up. So notice it goes all the way over to this, right? You know what, better yet, let me move this up a little bit so you can see it better. Alright, so when we're looking at it, right, it's all the way over here, and if you notice this lines up with -1. So I know that the furthest it goes left is -1. Also, I want you to notice that it was a closed dot. If I move this point, notice that was a solid dot. And so I'm going to put it back on there, solid dot. So that means that I had to use my less than or equal to symbol. And then if you look to the right, it has an arrow. That means that it goes to the right forever. So it's going to go to the right to infinity. Right? It's going to go forever to the right. So what I want to do is write a statement that has to do with the x values that says that it could be -1, because it can actually be it because we had a solid dot at -1. I'll close this out now. A solid dot at -1. And it can be anything bigger. And the easiest way to write that as an inequality would say that x has to be greater than or equal to -1. The reason I use this greater than or equal to is because any time we have a solid dot over on the left, right, we have to use one of those symbols. So x is greater than or equal to -1. So let's just see which one of these says that. So I'm going to go ahead and put my strike through real quick. It says all real numbers greater than or equal to -1. Okay, that's true, right? Because it's going to be all the numbers that are greater than or equal to -1, because that's our lowest value. So that one sounds correct. And let's just see why the others aren't correct. The next one says all real numbers greater than or equal to 1. This one's wrong because when they say 1, they're saying a positive 1. That means it would start here and go over if it was B. C says all real numbers. Well, that would have to have an arrow on it to the left in order to be all real numbers, because it'd have to keep going. So it can't be that. D says all real numbers greater than or equal to -1 and less than or equal to 5. Okay, so again, so this one right here, it's saying less than or equal to 5. That would mean that this has a dot, that it would stop over here at 5 on the x-axis. So it would have went up here and had a dot on it. But they didn't put a dot, they put an arrow. So that's false. So the correct answer is A, that it's all real numbers is greater than or equal to -1. Because it can be -1 or it could be any number to the right of it forever, because this graph continues to go. Go ahead and write a statement of how you solve this correctly.